So in this slide, we have a map, a couple of maps showing the line of the northern wall as described by Josephus, and as the remains of the line actually follow when we see them from the archaeology. So you can see that on the left side of the map, you can look at the left map to do this as I'm doing. You can see Hippicus Tower. That's one of Herod the Great's towers. It's next to the right of the Fossil Tower, or to the east of the Fossil Tower. And you see that this wall line continues and goes up to the Sverfinus Tower in the north, and then it goes straight across past the tombs of the kings, and then it turns around to the right and it goes down again, and it goes past the pool of Bethesda and down to join with the wall of the temple. And this northern area, that this large northern area outside the previous wall that it's encompassing, is the new area, or new suburb that built up beginning when Herod had workers in to build the temple, and then continuing on from there, because the temple was finished by the time that Agrippa was there. Like, there might have been some renovations done on the temple and little extra things done on it, but it finished under Herod the Great, in fact. So we have some quotations here that support our arguments, and that our archaeology supports. So the first one is from Antipodes. But Marsus, that's the Syrian governor, means it's a Roman governor of Syria, the legatus, had a suspicion what the meaning could be of so this is about the conclave that I told you about, that I discuss here. So around the same time as Agrippa was building the wall and Marsus was suspicious about it, he was also suspicious of a conclave that Agrippa held with a few client kings, Eastern client kings, who were all connected to him somehow, either grew up with him in Rome, related through marriage or through betrothals he was arranging with his daughter, one of his daughters, and so on. So they all had some sort of connection with him. One of them was extremely wealthy, and they were all honoring him in the conclave. So there's different interpretations as to this, whether it was just laid back meeting among friends and relatives. One of them was a relative, or if there was more to it than that. But considering that there were a few things going on at the same time, it could indicate that he was at least becoming more ambitious, even in a peaceful way. So let's read the rest of this. Marsus had a suspicion what the meaning could be of so great a friendship of these kings one with another, and did not think so close an agreement of so many potentates to be for the interest of the Romans. This was very ill taken by Agrippa, who after that became his enemy. The thing is, another way to interpret this is that before Agrippa was given his kingdom, it would have been Marsus who would have had power over the region. It would have come under Syria, and Agrippa's presence there curtailed, put a boundary on Marsus' own reaches. They were equal, they were both Roman, and they had jurisdiction over separate territories that bordered on each other. Now, Agrippa had always gotten along with the previous Syrian legates, but not with this one. But there's a backstory for Marsus anyway. Marsus had some difficult times, and it seems it didn't go very well for him separately. I mean, in his own private career, some accusations made against him and so on. And Agrippa, instead, he'd gone through some difficulties earlier on too, but he'd done extremely well for himself because he was so close to the Julio-Claudians. He'd grown up with them and they were like his family. So he was able to be more independent also for that reason. He was more confident too. And so his status in some ways might have seemed to Marsus to be a bit higher, or at least Marsus maybe couldn't do as much because Agrippa was so well connected, something like that. It could be something like a clash of wills where, as I'd mentioned also, Herod the Great, Augustus, and some years before, and his good friend, the statesman Vipsanius Agrippa, who is Agrippa the First, was named after him. So Vipsanius Agrippa and Augustus were friends with Herod the Great. Herod probably saw them as partners rather than as himself being subservient, and the Herodian family were treated more like friends than the other client kings, in fact, or rulers. So Vipsanius and Agrippa and Augustus at one point, the sources tell us, had a discussion in which they said that they suggested that perhaps Herod was doing so well, he was so good at keeping the area strong and peaceful, he was doing so much on behalf of Rome, he was so loyal, even though he was a Hellenistic king, he was a Roman citizen, but he saw himself as more of a Hellenistic king, we believe, from the archaeology and material remains and so on. So they had considered that perhaps he deserved to have his kingdom of Judea expanded to include Syria and Egypt as well. This didn't happen, but they were considering it. So, it could also be that because Agrippa was ambitious and he had friendships around the area and he was close to the Julio-Claudians, Marsus might have also been concerned that maybe Agrippa, at least in terms of authority and confidence, he was building campaigns in Syria, but this was a Herodian thing. It was they did that to help to show a strong Roman presence in Syria in the buffer zone with Parthia. So, but it could be that Marsus was a bit insecure and there was a bit of clash of wills, or Marsus misinterpreted some things, maybe exaggerated some things and was worried. So this is one way of looking at it by some scholars, but it may not be that way, but it's one of the possibilities. Or Agrippa was really, he was ambitious, but he wanted to keep in with Rome at the same time, but he might have wanted to expand either, if not territory, then at least authority further because he was doing really well, so he wanted to keep going. So, I mean, that's another possibility too. But Marsus then complained about both the wall and the conclave to Claudius, we would say. So, I suppose we've all seen things like that maybe happen where somebody's insecure or there's a little contest of wills going on or something, competition, or and somebody tries to make excuses and say, you know, no, they didn't have good intentions. You better watch out for that person. And actually, they were totally fine. So that is one way of looking at it, because he did make effort to get along with those that he was able to get along with. And that included the previous Syrian legates who were still his friends. So that could still be a little bit threatening for Marsus as well. So it's one way of looking at it that we can also see other scholars are looking at. Agrippa had he managed to be very popular with the Orthodox Jews. Not everybody, but in general, most people, he was really popular. He never punished an Orthodox Jew. He did have to remove a couple of high priests and replace them, but there's no record of any punishment. And he was the only Herod allowed into the inner temple precincts, which no Gentile could go into on penalty of death. And although Herod the Great was a Jewish convert, he was not Jewish ethnicity, and so he wasn't allowed in there either on penalty of death. And Agrippa was, but Agrippa was part Maccabee, part Hasmonean, so he was part real Jewish, but he also was good at negotiation and winning people over. He didn't get along as well with some of the Greeks, but it turns out we see now from the archaeology and from things that were happening that he also had Greek and Hellenistic people who did admire him. And there's some archaeological records of this. There's something with a temple, donation to a temple and prayer to a temple on his behalf. And then when he suddenly died under mysterious circumstances, considering it was at the peak of his reign and career, and the symptoms and so on. I've written about that as well. At that time, he was being cheered by a Greek, Roman, and Hellenized crowd in Caesarea. So he was pretty popular with the different factions, and that seemed to keep everything together as well, because the zealots, there's no record of any zealot activity taking place during his reign, but it starts up again immediately afterwards. So okay, the next part. Agrippa began to encompass Jerusalem with such a wall. Now this is in war, and I also included the quote from Antiquities, which is a little bit more strongly worded, but this one, with such a wall, which, had it been brought to perfection, had made it impractical for the Romans to take it by siege. Now, in the other quote, I gave you in another slide from Antiquities, it says that it would have made it impossible for anyone to take it by siege, to take Jerusalem by siege. But his death, which happened at Caesarea, before he had raised the walls to their true height, prevented him. Now, this indicates that he probably had hope that his having to cease the wall construction was temporary, and that Claudius, being his friend, he could reason with him, maybe make a visit to Rome again, and discuss it with him, and he might have been able to continue. I mean, another possibility is that the wall was needed to protect that new suburb, and where Jerusalem is geographically, it was directly on the route from Parthia. So should Parthia have decided, and Parthia, it was quite unstable, the relationship between Parthia and the Roman territories and the Roman friendship territories, client territories. It was pretty unstable, and there were various things happening in Parthia at the time. And if they had wanted to get in there into the buffer zone, they could have gone straight for Jerusalem. So it might have been a practical thing again. It says he had then reigned 3 years, as he had governed his tetrarchies 3 other years. No, they were not tetrarchies. This is little error. No, he'd been king for 7 years, but he had his extended larger kingdom, larger than the kingdom of Herod the Great, for about 3 years. But he'd had a kingdom from the beginning. They were not tetrarchies. They were was a kingdom, unlike Antipas and Philip and other Herods. Okay, the next one. So this tells you about the line of the wall. The third began at the Tower Hippicus. We already talked about that with the map. Hence, it stretched northward to the Tower Spepnus, and then descending opposite the monuments of Helena, of the kings actually, and proceeding past the royal caverns, it bent around a corner tower over against the so-called Fuller's Tomb, and joining the ancient rampart, terminated at the walls at the valley called Kedron. So it's the route that we already discussed. And the next one, this is by Tacitus, and it's a very interesting one. After Pompey's capture of Jerusalem, that's Pompey's capture, Pompey from the first triumvirate. That's, the time of Julius Caesar. So many years ago. So after Pompey's capture of Jerusalem, fear and experience taught them, the Jews, many lessons. So taking advantage of the money-grubbing instincts of the Claudian period, they purchased permission to fortify the city, and in the days meant for peace, built walls meant for war. So, this is by Tacitus. So it's saying here, it's referring to Agrippa's wall. And the interesting thing is, we've been speculating that it was done for peaceful reasons. But it did make the Romans suspicious. So let's say that Marsus was on the right track, So it's saying that Agrippa, because he was so skilled at negotiation and so on, at that time, Claudius had imperial freedmen helping him out as civil servants and taking care of various administrative situations in the state. And Agrippa knew Pallas, one of the freedmen, because Agrippa had been a client of Antonia Minor, and Pallas was her freedman. So originally, so they knew each other, and maybe he knew others too, and that he negotiated with these freedmen who some people thought were corrupt at the time because they weren't used to things being done with freedmen having more power and so on. They purchased permission to fortify the city. So purchased permission means that it wasn't just negotiation, maybe some money was changed hands as well. And maybe Tacitus knew something about this from older records that we no longer have. To fortify the city, and in the days meant for peace, built walls meant for war. So here Tacitus is saying that Agrippa's purpose in building that third wall wasn't a peaceful one, even though this was a peaceful period, because it was a peaceful period, because it was, his death was 20 years before the first revolt. So, and it was a very peaceful period under him because he managed to negotiate and keep things peaceful while he was alive. So it was peaceful on the surface, but he was building a wall meant for war. So we don't know if this is just speculation on somebody's part or if he had reason to believe this. And when you put it together with some of the other things, maybe he did. So it's a big mystery here, and it's a big discussion in the scholarly world. Okay, get on to the next slide now.